I'm meteorologist Caitlin McGrath tracking Hurricane Ian, which made its first landfall early this morning in western Cuba, right around 4:30 this morning as a major Category 3 hurricane with sustained winds of 125 miles per hour. The center of the storm now lifting just off of Cuba and into parts of the Gulf of Mexico. And as it continues to churn through the Gulf, there is really nothing standing in its way from strengthening throughout the day today. So right now moving to the north at 10 miles per hour into really warm water with very little interaction with land. And it is expected to strengthen into a Category 4 hurricane later today. But you can see South Florida already feeling the impacts from Hurricane Ian, those outer convective bands stretching all the way into South Florida. And this is really just the start of a few really rocky days for the state. So let's talk about where Ian is heading next. Again, moving to the north around 10 miles per hour. The National Hurricane Center strengthening it into a Category 4 hurricane by later tonight, approaching southwest Florida tomorrow evening. So not only did they change the track a little bit, they pushed landfall just to the south of Tampa, which is good news for Tampa, but bad news for areas to the south, parts of Fort Myers and the southwest Florida Gulf Coast. So that is, again, good news for Tampa, but bad news for areas to the south. But you have to keep in mind that far southwest Florida is the Everglades. Thankfully, not a whole lot of population in the area. And this is still going to be a significant storm approaching the Florida Gulf Coast as a Category 3 hurricane. Again, expecting that landfall sometime Wednesday night. So unfortunately, after the sun sets, while folks are trying to go to bed, we'll see the worst of this storm starting to push on shore. And I say starting because it's going to move so slowly. By Thursday morning, still potentially a hurricane, a Category 1 hurricane as it moves over parts of Tampa. Now, of course, whenever we typically see these storms move over land, they weaken relatively quickly, but Florida, such a small peninsula, it's still going to get energy from both the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic to keep that storm going, potentially as a hurricane, at least a tropical storm as it approaches Jacksonville by Friday morning. So again, keep in mind, landfall Wednesday night, still in Florida by Friday morning. We are talking about prolonged, really heavy tropical rain, significant wind gusts, and a prolonged storm surge. The storm surge, a big concern for parts of Florida and all the way up the southeast coast. We'll talk about more about that in just a minute. But first, we want to continue the track. The National Hurricane Center keeping Ian as a tropical storm as it moves through parts of Georgia and into South Carolina. This is Saturday, 8 a.m. moving into South Carolina, potentially still with tropical storm strength, not weakening into post-tropical Ian until Sunday morning. And from there, the storm does look to track well to our west. We'll get the remnants of Ian in the form of rain, but that will just about do it. Off and on rain Saturday, Sunday, all the way into Monday. But we're talking about relatively light to maybe at times moderate rain, but over such a prolonged period of time, our flood risk is incredibly low. Now we have hurricane watches, warnings, tropical storm watches and warnings in effect for just about the entire state of Florida, the exception being the far western panhandle. But those tropical storm watches continue all the way up into parts of the Carolinas. That's where we also now have a storm surge watch in effect. You can see all of the areas highlighted in that lighter pink. That's a storm surge watch. The areas with deeper pink, Jacksonville and pretty much all of the southwest Florida Gulf Coast, under a storm surge warning for significant storm surge expected. And keep in mind, the storm surge is just a wall of water on top of the sea level that just pushes on shore. And with the slow forward motion of Ian, we're looking at potentially multiple rounds of storm tide. When you get the astronomical high tide on top of the storm surge, just significant amounts of water moving inland. So here's how much storm the storm surge in the National Hurricane Center is expecting. Even parts of the Florida Panhandle, 1 to 3 feet. And then the farther south you get, the closer to the center of the storm where the strongest wind will be, 8 to 12 feet of storm surge possible for areas to the south of Tampa. 5 to 8 feet possible for parts of Tampa and down into parts of the Everglades, even the Florida Keys, expecting 3 to 5 feet of storm surge. And then you get into north central Florida on the Atlantic side, and we have about 2 to 4 feet of storm surge expected for Jacksonville all the way up into parts of Charleston, South Carolina. So this is a really wide-reaching, significant storm, not only for Florida. Of course, we're all talking about Florida because that's where landfall will be, but the impacts will be felt all the way up into parts of the Carolinas and eventually the rain for us this weekend. This is just one of our computer models' outlooks at how much rain we can expect, because we're talking about a lot of tropical moisture over a very long period of time, multiple days of this tropical rain over parts of Florida. They're already seeing it in South Florida today, and conditions will only continue to deteriorate as we head throughout the day today, into tomorrow, Thursday, even into Friday. It's not until the weekend when Florida will see the last of the rain roll through. And this is the European model forecasting potentially 2 feet of rain for Tampa. And that's not out of the question. This isn't our only computer model forecasting up to 2 feet of rain. That is just an exceptional amount of water on top of the storm surge and all of the wind damage that they can expect in the area. Over to Jacksonville, nearly a foot of rain over that possible for parts of north central Florida. Ocala, 15 inches, 13 inches for Daytona Beach. And keep in mind, this swath of heaviest rain can shift in either direction. So all of Florida really expecting that significant rainfall. The only exception being the Panhandle, where they really will miss out on the bulk of this storm. So again, we're talking about Hurricane Ian, and I want to point out how many I names have been retired. It's the letter with the most retired names, and hurricane names, they get retired when they reach a certain point of destruction. Exceptionally destructive storms will have their name retired so that there's never another hurricane with that same name. And there have been 12 retired I-named storms. That is more than any other letter in the alphabet, and it falls pretty naturally, right? Because by the time you get an I storm in a hurricane season, it's when the atmosphere is primed for these really strong, really destructive hurricanes right in the peak of hurricane season. And unfortunately, that is likely what we're looking at again with Ian. So these are the current retired names, but we know I storms can just be exceptionally devastating. So we'll continue to keep an eye on Hurricane Ian, bringing the very latest this afternoon at 2 o'clock once we get the new advisory in, and we'll see you back here on WUSA 9 at 5 with the very latest.